The Rebel Capitalist Show.
I'm by no means a Bitcoin maximalist, but I do really love the philosophy behind Bitcoin and sound money and decentralization. So I know one of the arguments for Bitcoin from the people who really understand it is that it takes the money system out of the government and out of the commercial banking system, because everyone can carry it just basically on a thumb drive. So therefore, lending wouldn't be even in the control of the banks. It can be from individual to individual. So, I mean, that takes decentralization to a whole new level, going the opposite direction of a central bank digital currency. So is that one, one counter argument, or is that something where we should be, or something that we should be optimistic about if we value freedom and liberty?
In principle, yes. I mean, you are, heading in the right direction, because the centralization is the problem.
Right.
And that's the trend that's being pushed, further and further centralization of power and decision-making and control tools. And by the way, one more angle is this: when you have only one central bank and you have no more banks, which is, the road that, some are wanting to go down, there won't be any more economic growth either, because
right.
there won't be productive credit creation. I don't see the central banks engaging in that, actually. And I think that explains why at the same time we've got these stories coming up with, oh, we don't need growth. Growth is bad for the environment, There's the whole climate story, and, we need to degrowth, all these books on degrowth and zero growth and so on. Let's have a Japanese style scenario, 20 years of, forever zero growth. That's being pushed now. But actually, just briefly on that, there is no contradiction between, being environmentally sustainable and environmentally enhancing and economic growth. It's not growth that is killing the environment. That's complete nonsense. Growth is just a statistical fiction. It doesn't actually exist, So how can it harm the environment? How can something fictional harm the environment?
Yeah.
What harms the environment is harmful activities like pollution and so on. But you can have growth without pollution. Whereas likewise, you can have zero growth and a lot of pollution as well. So it's complete nonsense to conflate the two, right? Doesn't make sense. But anyway, but that's the agenda that's being pushed: the centralization and ultimately zero growth, and then, Hunger Games. Whereas what we should be doing is, as you say, we should do the opposite and head towards decentralization and also maintain growth. We can have very high growth. In fact, we should increase growth, because what's been happening since the 1970s is that they've pushed down growth rates in so many countries artificially, saying, oh, it's because of aging society, fertility rates going down. These are all policy variables. They've been pushing hard to reduce fertility, with many techniques and methods. The potential growth rate has declined in America. In Europe, it's just very low, 1-2%. It's all nonsense. It's all not true. Potential growth in the US can be every year 10%. You can realize that and make it real if you have the right policies. I can certainly, put together the policies to get 10% economic growth in almost any country. And that's true in Europe as well. So what they've been doing is they've artificially been suppressing growth, and therefore we've lost enormous amounts of potential wealth, and those that have not benefited from the recent asset market booms, they could have been doing much, much better than they have, because we've had this artificial low growth scenario. So we should head for decentralization and maintaining high growth. Now, how can we do that? And that's where I see some limitations with Bitcoin, because it doesn't directly link to economic growth. I think, it's good to have alternative systems and decentralized systems. So that's good. By all means, use them. But we need something on top of that that gives us prosperity and the creation of new money linked to the implementation of new productive activities. And there's two things I'm proposing on this front. And one is to create local small banks. Community banks, small banks are the ones that lend to small firms. Small firms are the ones that are the biggest employer in every country. And also they're the ones that create new jobs. Now, small firms essentially get only credit from small banks. And that's what we need to set up. And that has the advantage of also being accountable organizations. If you have a small local bank, there is a chance to hold that bank to account, and the bank board and the decision makers. Any organization, human organization that gets too large becomes out of control. And even regulators can't control these big banks.
And a bank that keeps the debt on the balance sheet.
Yes, that's right.
Balance sheet.
Exactly. And with small banks, local banks, the advantage is also that, certainly if you set up a system like that, Germany has a system like that, they only lend locally.
Right.
So then a bank is forced to really think hard. We only have this district here. That's our turf. That's our area. We can only lend here. Well, what can we do? How can we help the businesses here? How can we help, even create new businesses? Bankers get very creative when you put them in this environment. They're essentially in the same boat as the small firms in their area, and then they will support them.
Yeah,
that works very well.
All the incentives are aligned.
Exactly.
In this scenario, Richard, so we're talking about the lending, productive lending, from the standpoint of the bank and having the capacity to do so. But how important are the balance sheets in the private sector that the bank, of the individuals and entities the bank could possibly lend to? So what I mean by that is if they're levered to the hilt, then even if we set up the small commercial banks, they're not going to have anyone to lend to without taking enormous amounts of risk. And then on that note, how important is the regulatory environment? Because if you had that structure in communist Russia, as an example, with no private property, then it wouldn't do any good. Or with taxes, I think that could be an issue as well. Yeah. It's like all these cross currents need to be considered.
Yes, but it's not rocket science. It's actually not very hard. I mean, the first point about who can they lend to? Well, if all the existing companies are already loaned up to the hilt, then then it will be younger companies, new companies, and they're always being created. I mean, the number of small firms is in the millions in every country, literally millions of them. And so there's never been a shortage of that. The regulatory environment is important. America has an advantage there because the small banks have their own regulator and they don't have to meet the Basel capital adequacy rules, which makes perfect sense. Can you imagine what's been happening in Europe? In Europe, this is where we have mostly small banks, tiny banks, local banks. In Germany, 80% of the banks are these small banks, local banks. And yet the Basel rules set up by the central bankers are being applied to all of them. So the tiniest German credit union with 10 staff has to meet the same rules and requirements as Deutsche Bank with 2,000 compliance staff and writing all the regulatory reports they need to fill in. So you can imagine for the last 15 years since they introduced the new rules, Basel III and so on, have been on the way of introducing them. Well, they've suffered and they've been forced to merge. So they've been killing them by not having a separate regulator and much laxer rules that are suitable, proportionate to the size.
And at the same time, flattening the end of the curve.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the tax point is also valid. I mean, essentially, we can have, once you have the right system that delivers high growth, you can have very low tax rates. And, you almost don't need taxes because there'll be so much prosperity. The government will have so many sources of revenue. So the important thing is to create the right high growth system, which is quite possible. And then the tax question will be solved easily.
Let's highlight some examples, Richard, that really back up this point. So
okay.
I've heard you talk about Germany having they're an export powerhouse. And I've heard you give some statistics on that. I think that would blow people's mind. And that's a great example of how powerful those SMEs actually are on a global scale. And so if we give them capital, how that will make society richer by producing more goods and services. Yes. So I think people would love to hear that.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do exactly that. Well, which is the country that has, I think it's the largest number of billionaires per capita of the population. And I think it's Germany. It's certainly one of the ones which the largest number. I think it's the ones with the largest number per capita of billionaires. And these are all owners of former SMEs that became so successful, global exporters, that of course, it's 100% owned by the families, all small family businesses. That's how you become a billionaire, So why are these German small firms, family businesses, so successful? Well, first of all, let me illustrate the success. Germany has a lot of exports. For many years, Germany had more exports in total size than China, a country with a population that's 30 times larger than Germany. So that's quite a success, but a huge part of those exports are from tiny, unknown, small firms, family businesses.
Right.
How is that possible? SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, they account for such a huge chunk of German exports. It's mind-blowing. Now, somebody studied this, and essentially what they did is they looked at the most successful German small firms, SMEs, and they defined the success as being the number one player in their market niche, or number two or number three. So the top three, like in the Olympics, gold, silver, bronze. So if you have global market share, number one, two, or three, then you're a champion. And because you're a small firm, they only did this for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises. As a result, there's no brand recognition. These are unknown names. So they call this hidden champions. So that's the definition of hidden champions. And then they did an international comparison. So how many hidden champions are there in each country?
Right.
Now, America is one of the strong players in this. There's 320 hidden champions in America, which is very good. It's the second highest figure in the world. The highest is Germany, which has 1,500. Which is head and shoulder above anyone else. If you look at the graph, everyone else is around 50, 60, or less, something like that. And how's that possible? It's because of the banking system. That's also why America is doing not so badly on this count, because it has a lot of small local banks, community banks. In Germany, we have a much larger amount of community banks per capita. And 80% of banks are local community banks in Germany. And they only lend locally. So they know their local players, their local small firms. When there's a new technology, and this is really what it's about when we look at productivity, and productivity simply is being able to implement the latest technologies. You don't have to invent them. You just need to implement and adapt them for your commercial purposes. And of course, this is also done by specialists, but every small firm therefore has, they get offers like, oh, we can upgrade this now to the latest technology. Well, what's stopping them? Money, of course. It's expensive to upgrade to the latest technology in your process is expensive. But in Germany, they just go to their bank, they explain, look, this is the latest technology. We want to stay champion, number one, two market share in the world. We've got to constantly upgrade. And the bank looks at it and says, okay, here's the loan, we'll do it. And that works best in Germany. As a result, they are most productive and most successful, and they have the largest number of hidden champions.